to get started, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about who you are and what you currently do.
Yeah, well, first, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here today and for Youth en Route for the opportunity to share my voice. So, I'm Finn Doze. I am a organizer, an educator, and a storyteller. And most of my work is really around trying to make the climate movement accessible because what I've seen through a lot of my educational work and my background is that we are not only dealing with a crisis of policy and a crisis of injustice, but also a crisis of communication. So, most of my work really revolves around trying to make the language and the framings that we use to talk about the climate crisis accessible to young people. And a lot of that work really ties into the 5 years that I spent co-chairing the Bay Area Youth Climate Summit, where I led workshops and a team of 28 youth from the Bay Area to advance local climate justice solutions that put power back into the hands of young people.
Amazing. Yes, we can definitely dive more into that because I want more details. Um, but going back a bit, how did you get started in the environmental justice movement?
Yeah, I've always been somebody that feels my emotions very deeply. I've always been very attuned to my surroundings and my environment. And for me, the catalyst was in 2020 when we had the wildfires that turned the Bay Area into this orange apocalyptic haze that was really illustrative and reminiscent of sort of a Martian atmosphere. And for me, it was that moment when I woke up that morning in the middle of this poly crisis of a global pandemic with this crisis of immense isolation and also climate crisis happening literally not just, 10, 20 miles away, but at our doorsteps. And for me, that was such a powerful and moving call to action, namely because a lot of my own family members and dear friends of mine, have pre-existing conditions and have grown up near urban areas where there is a lack of attention to air quality. So, to have this soot and the ash and the smoke just descending in high levels of particulate matter, really, it's not just something that you see, like on a scientific report or in a news article. We're talking about real people's lives here. So for me, that was really the catalyst for getting involved in the climate movement. And, you know, I think I just wanted to comment for a second that I've noticed as the years go by, more and more folks that I interact with in the climate space were called to action not because of news headlines, not because of hearing about climate disaster, you know, in another country or in another state, but because they were affected directly, because they got that glimpse, that very frightening doorway into what our futures will look like if we don't take the measures that we so desperately need to now.
Yeah, I very much remember that. I was also a student at Berkeley at that time, and it felt very familiar to me because I
Hmm.
grew up in the Napa Valley, and from like the years of 2017 to 2021, there was just like always these huge wildfires burning through the valley. And yeah, I think I was 16 when I got called into action
Hmm.
as well, when like I had to wear a mask for the first time. Like I could
Yeah.
see the haze right in front of me. Like my town looked like a ghost town. And
Hmm.
I saw how it was just impacting my friends and family. So, um, a follow-up question, because you were so young when that happened, do you feel like you lost part of your childhood as like becoming an organizer, from that moment?
That's a question that I find myself grappling with more and more. I'm still very young to be so committed to a fight and to a movement. I'm 19. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, there's this weight that comes with having to see your future literally be sold away and to get that glimpse of the chaos and the terror and the knowledge of what is to come. And I think that a lot of young people, it sounds like in your case too, we've grown up only in the context of immense wealth gap, of climate injustice, of the endless fight for our reproductive rights and for liberation over our own bodies, especially for Black and Brown folks. And I think to see the lack of policy change, really, and the lack of attention from the folks in the seats of power on those issues is really, really a burden for young people. And, we don't feel like we have the luxury to just run around and play. A lot of us feel that if we don't take responsibility and action now, no one's going to do anything. So I think, like, for me, to answer your question more directly, I do feel that in a lot of ways, the pleasures that a child should inherently, deserve, I was robbed of because the moment I entered high school, this time where I'm supposed to be out and about with my friends and having this sort of carefree, more lifestyle, you know, doing things on the weekends. I was in Zoom calls from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., organizing actions and organizing workshops and organizing campaigns to get the people who are getting paid to do their jobs to actually serve their constituents. So, in a lot of ways, I think that I, well, I did make time for joy, of course, and for fun, and even found some of my greatest friends through this movement that I was called to participate in. I think, and I don't know if this is how you feel, there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with caring for so much that we walk with every day through our lives. And that is at once beautiful and also, too, sometimes really isolating to be in a room of people who are your age, who are more interested maybe in doing the other things that other teenagers are doing. And you're here thinking about whether that elected official is like actually going to do their job. So, there's pros and cons. And ultimately, I wish, though, that people who were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old didn't have to join a climate movement. I wish they could just go outside and play and be able to drink clean water and breathe clean air.
Yeah, very interesting times we're in. And I guess a follow-up question I have for that is, you know, when you're living in this time and this context of climate crisis, and you're so young, it takes a toll on your mental health because you're like, this is going to be my future. Like, I'm going to have to be fighting
Mm-hmm.
until I'm like 50, 60 years old. And I think a lot of my peers at Berkeley experienced this with the curriculum that was taught in like the environmental classes was very focused on the problems and the
Oh,
issues
don't
and
even get me started.
yeah. And I think, yeah, I was like a freshman or sophomore during 2020 when all of that was happening. And for me personally, it took a big toll on my mental health. It's just like I'm studying problems. Like, I don't feel like I'm being equipped in my classes to make a change and to have hope and to find solutions. And yeah, I guess I have two follow-up questions for that. Like, how do you take care of your mental health throughout it
Mm-hmm.
all? And I would love to hear more about your decal, about, if that's any connection to that.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I resonate with a lot of what you just said because I think that a lot of young people feel an immense sense of dread, a sense of guilt, of shame for a climate crisis that we didn't cause, you know? And I think that that really starts at a young age with like the mass media that we consume, telling us every second that we need to, calculate our carbon footprints. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Let's be for real now. Whose carbon footprints are the ones that need to be calculated? It's the fossil fuel industries responsible for 75% of global emissions. So to be 10 years old and to be in your, you know, third, fourth grade class having to calculate your carbon footprint just instills this sense of guilt for, you've only been on the earth for like a fraction of these oil executive CEOs, lives. So I think a lot of the climate mental health can be solved very easily by changes in the ways that we are educating and the ways that we are communicating this crisis. Um, and if just to get personal and vulnerable for a second, I think for me, I really struggled in high school to feel a sense of support for my work. There's an immense level of self advocacy that young people have to do to feel like they can fit in to this nonprofit industrial complex in our organizing movements. And I think that that is so destructive because it takes the value away from relationships, from joy, from sharing, from community, to having every Friday night to put all your effort into writing a grant application to fight for this much funding that is available to youth and you know, queer BIPOC organizing. And I think for me that was really a hard part because I think that not a lot of people really pay attention to the endless struggle of seeking validation and acknowledgement just to exist in doing this work. And I think when it comes to, my emotions, to care so much all the time and to not always have the community to lean on can be a really isolating experience and can really generate a high level of burnout. I think we're seeing right now, like in the current political moment with the rolling back of all of these different policies, that a lot of people are really burning out. They're tired, they're exhausted of fighting for breadcrumbs. So I think the shift that we need is to remind ourselves that our movements are not just against something, but they are for something. And that's where I love to bring in this idea of, like radical imagination, where we can actually shift the conversation away, as you're saying, just from like these problems, from all these injustices, because frankly, we don't need to be taught them. We're living them. Like all of a lot of the organizers from, if you're from a frontline community, why is there some 60-year-old like dude in a classroom lecturing you about what the problem is when you're the one who have been living it every day since the day you were born? So for me to like talk about the decal for a second, which for everyone not from Berkeley, that's basically like our student taught courses that we have here. It's called Solutions for a Sustainable and Just Future. And it's about radically imagining a society where we are living within ecological boundaries and also building a thriving circular economy that serves people, that serves workers, and that is not built on this linear system of disposability. where corporations and the 1% billionaires and CEOs take all of the profit away from everyone else. So this decal really emerged uh, as a disruption of the educational models that are focusing only on the problems and everything that is wrong. Because, as you were saying, higher education is failing us. You know, folks go into college passionate to study environmental science, environmental studies, uh, sociology, but then they end up tapping out and shifting away because the weight of that on our bodies and the weight of that on our minds is just too intense. So having this education that is peer to peer, you know, horizontal, we are all learners, we are all teachers, we are all listeners, I think has really galvanized a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily even consider themselves to be like an environmentalist or an organizer to join the fight. You know, whether you're an engineering major, whether you're interested in public health, or whether you're interested in econ, you know, there's a place for you. And I think that really is like the organizing praxis that we're trying to promote.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that. You're doing fabulous work. And, I feel like in the environment, the climate crisis is at the intersection of everything. Like it affects everyone, all living creatures. And when I was at Berkeley, I think my approach and solution to navigating those feelings was also leading a decal called Latinx in the Environment Initiative. I'm not sure if you've heard about
Love
them.
that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And, we had students from different departments, different experiences, but we could all relate with just our shared identity and what our families experience
Yeah.
and, how we can all come together and very similar to the decal you're running.
Yeah. Can I ask
And
you a question about that?
yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm curious, like, did you feel that you could really see like a difference in terms of how folks were like engaging with the material when it was, more like community center?
oh yeah. I think even for me, I think I'm not sure if you're in CNR, but like
Yeah, I am.
yeah, I think like even when we were talking about these topics, I didn't feel comfortable enough to share my experiences, like of course in my reflections and stuff, I
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like I could, but just having that space, just as a person of color, as a queer person, I think
Hmm.
helped so much and it gave me a lot more confidence. And um yeah, it's very different. And I think, Youth on Rue is very focused on like peer-to-peer learning, youth learning from each other and supporting each other. And I think like being a
Because
co-lead for that class would really help me.
yeah, I mean, and I love that too, like that idea of peer mentorship, because ultimately, like, I think that is a strategy of like adaptation too for our future of like climate chaos. If we're not leaning on one another for support, then how are we going to weather the storm, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I guess like a follow-up question for that is like, how do you make space for people of color in your work, in your decal, and just, yeah, with the work you do?
Yes, no, thank you so much for asking that question. And for me, really, if we are not sharing space in this movement, then we have to be asking ourselves the question of what are we actually doing? What kind of change are we actually trying to make? How are we actually disrupting injustice? So that's something for me that has definitely been a huge like question that I'm always asking myself in my organizing. And, you know, I think ultimately making space for BIPOC folks, like as a white organizer, is a conversation that more of us need to be having. Like, I feel like it's sort of like this question that sometimes makes folks like uncomfortable. And we really need to be like moving through that uncomfortability because if we can't talk about that, then like what are we striving for? So for me, I would really say it comes down to passing the mic. You know, when I'm up there on stage, if it's a lecture where we're talking about like EJ, why am I the one lecturing about like environmental racism when my friend, fellow lecturer, person of color is like right there who has lived this experience, has lived the experience of growing up in an area that was redlined, like in Florida. So that comes down to like passing the mic. But I also think it goes beyond, you know, just like that phrase into an everyday like practice. And I think to me that really looks like showing up not just for these insular climate movements that are sometimes so whitewashed, so greenwashed, but also showing up to strike with like working class black and brown union workers, showing up to the strike at the local Richmond refinery that is in a predominantly like Latinx area, you know? And I think that for me, actions always speak louder than words. And a lot of it comes down to solidarity and knowing that if we're not showing up for Palestinian liberation, if we are not showing up for like Arab liberation, we're not showing up and understanding that racism and xenophobia and colonialism are the drivers of the climate crisis at root, then you are failing to understand climate crisis as it has manifested over the centuries. You know, this would not exist without the transatlantic slave trade. This would not exist without the reaping and extracting of precious resources from the global south. So for me, that ultimately really comes down to understanding that climate justice means black and brown liberation. It means queer liberation. It means feminist liberation, reproductive liberation, indigenous liberation, disability liberation, and liberation of all of our bodies together. You know, and I know that's a lot of words. I don't want that to sound like buzzwords, but for me, it really ultimately is about every single day acknowledging how those struggles are bound and knowing that racism is ultimately one of the greatest like drivers of climate crisis, in my opinion.
That's very powerful. Thank you. I feel like, yeah, as a youth, and I think like a lot of people can look up to you and like learn from how you see the world and like how you're approaching this movement. Because we're here in California. I think we're very like integrated, diverse space, but we don't know it's not going to be like that, like in the Midwest and you know, in
And
New
even
England or
and
whatever
even
it is.
I even in California, you know, like so much of our neighborhoods and our communities are really divided up by like class, which then correlates to like race. And I think that at the end of the day, like I also, if there's one thing that I would more concretely like respond to your question, frankly, we all need to be like having conversations with each other. So if you're just a group of like white organizers in an area where there are black and brown organizers, like we need to be opening up spaces to one another. I mean, and another topic too that I didn't really get into because I haven't really been in the hands of power in this way, but it also comes down to funding too. Like I oftentimes see a lot of these more sort of like wealthier like white groups receive so much of this funding to be organizing around problems that they didn't even necessarily like grow up in. And I think that funding really needs to be like equally distributed to, you know, folks in frontline communities.
For sure, definitely. And yeah, I think like connecting and sharing stories is like a great way to do that. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think, the media sometimes focuses on the wrong story. And it's like there are so many other people who had that experience and maybe just weren't given the mic and weren't able to
Mm-hmm.
speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess like from that, do you have any advice for young people who want to get involved in the movement or like where to start?
Oof. Well, it's a crazy moment. So to all of the youth out there, if you're looking to get involved, you know, we're all here, like as organizers, pillars of support for one another. I think I just want to start off by saying that. But yeah, I mean, I think right now with the chaos that we're seeing, it's a certain kind of weight on our minds and our hearts and our bodies and our shoulders that I think is manifesting differently than when I got involved in organizing. So, one, I want to say that there is no right answer to this. There is no right or wrong way to enter the movement. There are limitless avenues and opportunities. You just have to find the folks who can support you and hold your hand like through that entry point. I would say for me, one of the most impactful ways to start is to find a group of people on a local level about an issue that you care about and get involved there. And it can be daunting, but if there's anything that I could say right now, as organizers, as folks fighting for clean air and clean water and racial and economic justice, we're always looking to get more people involved. So receiving that DM, receiving that message, receiving that email, like it actually does bring a smile to our faces. So don't feel scared to reach out to a person. Don't feel scared to, you know, send an email to that contact, info that you found on like the website of a local organization. And I think one thing too, if I were to just like drop a few names, a great way if you're a student to start your organizing is to get involved with local hubs like Sunrise, or to really get involved with even like local unions, teachers unions or workers unions. They're always looking to build solidarity with students, and the fight for a livable wage is also tied to the fight for climate justice. So there are really so many different avenues that we can all take, but ultimately you can't do it alone. You've really got to find friends and people to lean on. So focus, on really building that community of support and reaching out, I'd say.
Yeah. And something I'll add is like, for me, I think for me personally, when I got to college, I was very intimidated by all these like strong young activists, like leading these marches, leading these rallies. And, even if you're a little bit more shy and unfamiliar with things, like people will like support you, people will hold you. I think I felt a lot of support and love from the environmental justice community, and there's a voice and space for everyone, despite like whatever strengths you think you may have. Um, it's a very welcoming community. Um, yeah,
100%. I mean, if there's also too something that I'd add, and I don't know if you've seen this as like sort of a issue, but something I would like note for folks that are looking to get involved is the climate movement is suffering from like a crisis of fragmentation, where we have so many different groups that are broken down and isolated. So I would just be intentional about thinking about if you're starting your own group, your own collective or whatever, I would maybe like take a moment to look around and see who else is already working on these issues, uh, and have already done the work of forming an organization. Because ultimately, like we're trying to build and foster longevity. We're not trying to, you know, just create more and more and more and more founders. So yeah, think about like who's already there and definitely like reach out to those folks because they really want to support you.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. Um, it's been great talking to you. I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd like to share or plug or talk about what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to sort of maybe hear more about what you imagine a bright future to be. Like, I'd love to hear your vision for the future, and maybe we could just end on sharing our visions for the future.
Yeah. Um, yeah, let's see. I think right now I'm working at a public library, and for me, as someone, who just had like grew up in poverty and like didn't have access to resources and
Mm-hmm.
community, like I saw how the public library became like a really big support system for me. And now that I work at a library, I see how that transcends to other people's lives
Mm-hmm.
now. And I think like I feel so lucky to still be living in like the same area I grew up in. And I think I've been able to make more meaningful connections. And that's kind of like how I
Mm-hmm.
envision a more just future, like just meeting people, like connecting with people, hearing people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I feel so grateful to be a part of Youth on Route just because they're doing great work in so many different ways. And to be a part of it, just like imagine helps me imagine like a future where
Mm-hmm.
youth are leading and youth are standing up and power and respect is giving to youth and youth experiences. But yeah, I think community is a big thing for me. Yeah,
I love that. I love that. No, definitely like respect. I think that there needs to be more respect, you know, between all of us, like in terms of like as an intergenerational community, like I think that elders and youth both like need to be in conversation more. And also too that like just because you're young, I think doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have knowledge. If anything, you have a bright, fresh perspective that is so, so valuable, I think, to like looking beyond in the world that we are trying to build. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to end on this question because I think for me, as I mentioned earlier, we are not a movement against, we are a movement for. And I think sometimes that can get lost in the endless barrage of media and the endless assault of news chronicling the apocalypse that all of us are handed every single day. So for me, I like to think that the change we're trying to build is never something that is impossible. You know, we can live in a world free of fossil fuels, free of poison in our air and in our lungs, and lean into our, empathy and support one another in communities where economies are shared, where, we share resources and we share knowledge, not in a linear way where things just break and everything has planned obsolescence, but in a way that is, you know, generative and where goods are upcycled, and I want every youth and every person young to know that that world is not impossible. Yes, it is going to take a hell of a fight to get there, but we can see it in a lot of different communities. We can see it in our, indigenous brothers and sisters societies. And it's something that we can achieve if we work together.
thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and you have so many great perspectives and things to share. Hope to stay connected and follow the work that you're doing. And, you always have community with Youth on Route.
Oh, appreciate it. Yes, no, love working with y'all. And Yeah, thank you so much again for creating like this space to share. And I hope that folks out there can, you know, feel a sense of togetherness from like conversations like these. So if anyone out there too, like would ever want to get in touch with me, and whoever listens to this, feel free to contact or get in touch. Yeah, but no, thank you so much, Melissa.
Have a great day.
All right, bye.